Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight we are on episode 153, and changing gears ever so slightly tonight. Thought we'd talk a little bit about the weird and spooky experiences that we've had out in the woods. Now, when I say weird and spooky, I mean it could just be strange, weird, maybe spooky. Anybody that's been out in the woods for any amount of time generally has a story, you know? It's that go-to story, oh, this one time. And I thought that's what we'd do a little bit tonight. I thought it might be fun. We'll tell a couple of our stories. If anybody's out there listening, feel free to throw in your stories and we'll bring them to light too. Because to me, I find it real interesting to see what other people have experienced and how they interpret those experiences. Like, I'm fairly certain you, like myself, Ben, if you hear something that's strange, weird, or spooky, there's this almost uncontrollable urge to figure out what it was and why it happened. Like, curiosity just becomes almost an overpowering force.
Well, I guess. I mean, you got two choices, right? The fight or the flight. So one is you go check it out, and the other is you get the hell out of there.
And that's fair. I mean, fight, flight. Actually, they've upped that, eh? There's three. There's fight, flight, and freeze now.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know what? I only heard that recently in some of Mel's courses. But anyway, apparently they're saying there's fight, flight, and freeze. Which freeze is an offshoot of flight. It's just the lack of being able to do so. Anyway, a whole other debate there. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's I can find things creepy and spooky and stuff like that, but I generally don't get to the point of, oh, you know, I'm too scared about that, unless I know it's something dangerous. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's a bear, I'm not going to go see if it's a bear. I'll just assume it's probably a bear, and I'll move on with my day. But much in the instance, I guess one of the first stories, very short one because we had mentioned it before, you and I, with the running water and the rocks moving underneath, like it very creepily sounds like voices talking in the night. You know what I mean? And all it is a combination of the water moving, and some of the rocks maybe moving underneath, and, you know, the water whipping through cavities in the rocks and stuff like that. But laying in your... Picture this, everybody. You're laying in your tent or your hammock or whatever it is. It's fairly late at night. You might have somebody with you. Possibly first time you've ever been out camping together, out in the middle of nowhere. No real way of getting out except to hike, and then once you get that hike, it's a motorcycle down a real shady rock road. And when I say shady, I don't mean like it's dark. I mean like it's a shale road, and you got to go very slow and delicately, or you could potentially lose a tire. Very realistically. Right, Ben?
So what you're saying is it would be a tricky ride on a dirt bike, but two geniuses to try to drive street bikes up this road.
Yes, and that's it. And we made it, and it was fine. But anyway, middle of the night, you're laying there. You're just kind of dozing off. You're already cold, you know what I mean? So you're kind of uncomfortable. We also made a different mistake on this one. And then you hear what literally sounds like, behind the crackling of the fire, because you can still hear that in the background, in the waterfall, whispers. And I mean, you're like, okay, well, maybe this other person, you know, no one being pointed out here, is on their phone and they're listening to something.
No.
That's fine. And you kind of cast a glance over. There's no light coming from that hammock. So either they're, you know, just listening to it and the thing's off, which, okay, maybe it's a podcast. Conveniently enough, we do one of those, doing research, whatever the case may be. No, that's not it. It's literally voices out in the middle of the woods. Like, this is what it sounds like. And it sounds like whispers. Nothing malicious. Like, don't get me wrong. But it truly did sound like there was people just off in the woods whispering. Which is kind of creepy.
Whispers and almost children's laughs.
Yeah, that... And then, of course, the joke started about wood sprites and nymphs and stuff like that. Which, you know, good folklore goes a long way. Don't get me wrong. But... And if anybody hasn't figured it out by this time, that's listening to us and not watching and all the funny faces we're making here, this was actually Ben and I's first time out in the woods. First time really meeting each other for any, like, off-camera, aside from casual passing at the Nova Scotia Bushcraft gathering. And yeah, literally in the backwoods of nowhere, and you're hearing voices and giggles and stuff like that, and you're just really unsure. But we chatted about it, had a few laughs, and the best we came to, and what seems the most logical and the way we could repeat the process, was it sounded like the river running and going through the rocks and stuff like that. Like, once you got closer to the river, you could tell it was just kind of, you know, stuff jiggling and wiggling around. But for anybody that might be a little spooked to begin with, especially if it was the first time out in the woods, or you had somebody with you that potentially is not used to being in the woods, that would be a very eerie and spooky feeling. Because
Yeah. I think it could. I don't feel that either of us were freaked out. We were just confused.
yeah,
But
very confused because like it was so far off the beaten path. You know what I mean?
yeah, you weren't hearing like the kids a few houses away or at the park that's only like we were miles from any people or animals that would have, that you'd associate with that kind of noise. Um, but yeah, for sure. I
It
mean,
was
that was,
strange. You know what I mean? It could be spooky, but it was strange.
yeah, yeah. Um, I've tried to think of other experiences, and I think I've mentioned this on a past one. The first time I ever heard a partridge um, drumming its wings
Mm.
freaked me right out. It was me and my cousin. We were way back on a river in Newfoundland. I think it was called Sandy River. And we were way back to a beautiful swimming spot. And off in the distance, you could hear what sounded like Native American like drum sounds to us. And we were like, there is no people back here. There are definitely nobody's back here doing anything like that. We knew that for a fact. We knew there was no one for miles. And we kind of got a little weirded out by it. We went up the river and we couldn't see anything. And I got back and I was talking to my father. And, my father had been in the woods for many a moon. And he laughed. He laughed pretty hard at that one. And he said, man, that's a partridge.
But I mean, once again, generally what drives strange, weird, and spooky things is a lack of knowledge on the subject. And it's not that it's ignorance. I mean, I guess on some levels it could be ignorance. It's just you haven't accumulated that kind of experience yet. So that's why I find this stuff interesting. This is how generally the first time you, for instance, hear a partridge, if you're not familiar with it, it's an unnerving sound. Funny side story to that. The house of Marigamish, before it burnt down, it used to be on sonotubes, and one end was open. We used to get a partridge that would go under there and beat its drum beat under the house. Now you can imagine this if you're like upstairs or even in the bottom and you hear this thing reverberating through the house. Dang near drove us insane. But I get how out in the woods, if you had never heard that before, that would be kind of a weird sound.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's not many animals that make a drum beat sound. You know what I mean?
Oh. No. Just going through my head, what are some other things that I've seen or thought about that was kind of odd? And I guess like late at night when you get the reflection of certain animals' eyes, that can really freak some people out, especially like in the firelight. That like glittering, like you can tell it's an eye, but it doesn't look like it's not a human eye, which would be just as creepy, honestly. If you're in the middle of the woods and all you see is a set of eyes, it's as creepy as it gets, right?
I got one for you, Ben.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard a bobcat scream?
No.
Okay, so you want to know what sounds literally like a monster in the woods when you're wandering around. And I encourage everybody to look up bobcat scream or bobcat, sound, something like that. They make a chirp sound, and that's not the one, but they'll let out like, imagine a house cat that's angry, and then make that house cat on steroids and a lot bigger. And this thing, like, it sounds like a monster. So a lot of my fun times happened with my work with natural resources, and this one is no different. I was out in the woods, probably doing a WAP or something like that, and I heard this, like, blood-curdling screech or scream is the only way to put it. And I mean, I generally don't get unnerved by things. I can usually be like, yeah, all right, whatever. And this was daylight. This wasn't at night. This was daylight. And the way this sounded, it truly, like, it actually spooked me out quite a bit. I'd never heard one before. I'd only ever seen a bobcat like at the zoo and stuff like that. I'd never seen one in the wild. And I'd never seen this one, don't get me wrong. But it makes a sound that is, it's literally a blood-curdling scream. And I could picture if somebody was back in the woods, like way back. I wasn't that far back. I was far enough, I guess, but I was off like an ATV trail, you know what I mean? And this happened. And it was absolutely terrifying. I have no other way of explaining it other than, like, here I am, 23, 24, just starting my career in natural resources. And it was like the creepiest thing I'd ever heard out in the woods. I didn't, like, you have these instant thought of a cougar is what I thought of. And anybody knows, here in Nova Scotia, There's been no proven cases of cougars in Nova Scotia. There's debate if there is, if there isn't, but there was enough of thought process in my head. That's the first thing I thought. Like, the only thing that can make a sound like that is a gigantic cat that wants to eat me. And I was right. It was a cat. But bobcats really aren't that big, and generally they'll avoid people. They're not something that would typically track, stalk, and otherwise annoy a person in any way, shape, or form. They're a very skittish creature. They just have a very ill-sounding scream, which is it's unnerving. It's probably one of the most unnerving things I've ever heard in the woods.
Yeah, I could see that. A fox crying can be pretty weird too.
I don't know if I ever actually heard a fox crying.
I have a couple of times. The first time I was actually in my house and I got woke up in the middle of the night. And when I looked out the window, there was a fox in the middle of the street right in front of my house. And it was crying. And it was something like almost somewhere between a baby crying and a seagull crying. And it kind of weirded me out for a bit. And I wasn't even in the woods. And I've seen tons of foxes and stuff growing up, but that was the first time I seen one. It sat there and it cried like a baby. It was.
I heard rabbits can potentially sound like kids crying too. I personally never heard it myself, but I've heard that's another one that they can make a really hellish noise that sounds like a baby crying out in the woods. And I've heard from logging camps and stuff, I've heard people been spooked by those a couple times. I don't know, Carl, if they're similar. So Carl says, are they similar? Because I've heard what Rob is describing, but I was hoping it was a fox. In my case, it was a bobcat. Like I said, I don't know if I've ever truly heard a fox cry, to be perfectly honest.
For the one I experienced was much more like the baby crying than like a blood-curdling scream. But again, like, we are kind of predisposed to hear a baby cry and want to do something about it. And hearing a baby cry where you don't expect the baby is kind of freaky. If you watch anyone who talks like about the Appalachians and at night you don't go out and check out on weird sounds because it's dangerous. That's kind of the thing. Like they say, if you hear someone saying your name in the middle of the night, don't go check it out. If you hear a baby crying, don't go check it out. Because you don't know what it is, and it may not be anything you want to come across.
Talking about Wendigos and skinwalkers now, but
well, people believe in some of these things.
And that's the other thing why I find these conversations interesting. You actually learn the stem of a lot of folklore.
Yeah. Personally, I've never come across anything that, like, once I figured it out, I said, well, I'm never going back in the woods again. That's just too terrifying. But I can understand where people get scared of stuff. And then you hear things like, yeah, a rabbit does scream quite loudly, especially when they're being caught. It is a different scream than a baby crying, but it is almost human in its own right, and it's quite cutting. I've heard them when the owls are taking them out, and maybe when other animals have bitten into them. Yeah, I mean, it's nature. I mean, animals are going to get eaten, and they don't do it quietly.
I don't think anything does it. Well, that's a lie. I have seen some quiet animals go down, but honestly, they must have had some issues. But anyway, I don't think I might have heard a rabbit when I was younger. I can't remember. I truly don't. I do got one story, and it's not overly lengthy. I still haven't figured out what it was to this day. I have my theories. So anybody out there listening, lean an ear this way. I'll tell you what happened. You tell me what you think it is, and I'd be interested to get your input too, Ben. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I have an idea what this is, but I'm not 100% sure. Once again, natural resources. We do PGIs, pellet group inventories, fairly early in the year. You're going to do it before green up. A lot of times when we go out, there still may be snow in the woods, which is not ideal for PGIs, of course. We try to get out after the snow is gone, but before green up happens, all that good stuff. Anyway, this time I had gone out and there's still snow. Wasn't much. In the woods, it was a little deeper. It might be 6 inches in spots where the sun couldn't get to and things like that. Anyway, nice long tour going out. A little bit of background on a PGI. You travel basically in a straight line for a kilometer into the woods. You count rabbit poop, deer poop, stuff like that. It's what the province uses to do statistics on populations for rabbits, coyotes, deer, and other things. So anyway, hammering through this PGI. Thing is, I had to walk a kilometer into the woods before you even start the PGI, so by the time you get to the end of it, you're around 2 kilometers in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of times you got to travel to the middle of nowhere to start these PGIs again, because they want to be in densely wooded, non-interfered with humans kind of areas. You know what I mean? You can kind of picture the place. It's generally where we try to find to go camping. So anywho, get out there, doing the PGI, things are great, and I get to this part of real thick woods. And I mean, it's thick, but not terribly thick. It's not softwood thick, if you know what I mean. It's hardwood thick. Does that make any kind of sense? Like softwood thick, it's literally like matchsticks tied together. Hardwood thick, you still get maybe 2 to 3 feet between trees, but even when there's no leaves, very little sun and stuff gets through it. It's kind of eerie. I think it was like a popple, maybe birch stand or something like that. Anyway, towards the end of this PGI and going through this stand, which I'd done in the past, I come across this area that's completely devoid of snow. And it's almost perfectly circular. Keeping in mind there's trees and stuff like that. And, I originally thought, okay, well, maybe it's just the way the sun hit it. But this almost looked like snow hadn't fallen in this area. You know what I mean? Which was very odd considering the area around it was still very much the same trees. Nothing really changed. No topography changes. No drastic weather pattern changes. Like there wasn't a mountain that could potentially curve a wind. Like I looked at all these things pretty logically. But anyway, I get there and there's this area that's particularly open, which is odd. No snow. Like it had never fallen there. And in the middle of this, there's a lot of like patches of fur and bones. And when I say fur, I don't mean like animal fur. It almost looks like hair. Like it's longer. So I don't know. Anyway, and it was just one of those things, like it was weird bones. It wasn't what you would expect from a deer or like a normal animal that you would find out in the woods. To me, it was like larger bones. And anyway, it was just really odd. I couldn't find any tracks coming in or out of this area. I couldn't find any real reason what would beat the snow down and, get rid of it in that way. But to be fair, it was melting, so if it was lower in that area, it would naturally melt faster, and this is one of the conclusions I've come to. But anyway, it was just weird. There was no tracks coming in and out for how fresh the bones and hair were in this area. And it was just odd. And I never really... To this day, I still don't know specifically what it was. I have my theories. My theory was it was probably like a coyote feeding area or something like that. And just from them circling, it must have beat down the snow and it melted and it just gave the appearance. And this is just me trying to rationalize this. But if anybody else has a better idea on this, I'd be very curious to hear the theories. I had somebody with me. His name was Matthew. I'll leave his last name out. But he was with me and both of us agreed. Like it was a real odd thing. For guys that have been in the woods, seen a fair bit of stuff that goes on in the woods, like we deal with natural resources, we deal with animals, we have to do wilderness acquisition plans, WAPs, things like that. We're used to seeing what's out there, and this just came off as odd. And once again, I was fairly new to natural resources, but I continued to work with them for a long time afterwards. Still never seen anything like that. The next year I went back, it was like the area never existed. So it's... Like, Matt and I actually went back and tried to find the area again and take people and being like, yeah, this is where we seen it and all that good stuff. Like, it just, the area almost changed. So we don't know if maybe we got bumped off course. Because when we first started, we really just relied on compass and stuff like that. We don't know if maybe there was some iron in there at later years. We moved into GPSs and things got accurate. Now, Bushcraft Nick's saying could be heat coming off the carcass that was there. It was too big of an area. We're talking an area like almost 8 feet round. Like, not huge, but big enough. You know what I mean? And like I said, almost perfectly circle. Which, this is where my thinking is, if there was a carcass in the middle of it, which was where a lot of these bones were, I imagine coyotes would come in a circle to feed. Once again, that's my theory. It's still one of the strangest things I've ever seen in the woods. Didn't really freak me out, but I still don't have a definitive answer, because from what I know about coyotes, it really doesn't fit their pattern. What I know about wolves and the very few that we have in this area, if any, it really didn't fit their pattern. It didn't really fit a pattern of a known predator that I had experience with, including bears and stuff like that. I told other people about it. And yeah, it just wasn't there. And unfortunately at the time, we're talking like 2003, cell phones really weren't the best with cameras. We didn't always carry them with us. So we don't got no pictures except Matt and I's words. So if you think we're crazy, that's cool. That's fine. But it's just something I've never really been able to fully figure out. And I've talked to some biologists and stuff like that, told them, and they're like, well, yeah, it could be this, could be that, but it really doesn't fit the pattern. So if anybody out there has seen stuff like this before, has an idea, by all means, shoot me a message. I'm curious to see what your folks' theories are out there. Anything like that for you, Ben, or?
Not quite like that. I mean, I found animals in the woods before, but nothing that said to me like this is unusual. I think the things that have generally perplexed me were human things that I found in the woods, and sometimes it's like, how did this get here? Like I found a car, like a 1950s car, in the woods, and it was so far in the woods. Like the trees around it were huge, and the tree that was growing up through the middle of it was probably 40, 50 years old for sure, if not more. Told me it had been there for a while, and there was no sign of a road or an access for this vehicle to get to this location. Like it seemed really odd. And, all I can picture is there was a road quite a ways away and up quite a bit of a hill, and at some point it was on that hill and just came down. You know what I mean? Rolled it and just ended up there. No one decided to do anything about it, left it there. I still have the hood on it somewhere. Probably.
I don't think the car needs it anymore, that's for sure.
No, I stole that off of it, so it was like an old Angelica.
It's not stealing, it's repurposing. At that point, it's junk, I think. Maybe it was an art project.
It was a few feet under. Like we only noticed it because when we stepped on it, it sounded different than the ground around it. You know what I mean?
It's fed on by more than one animal, so certainly sounds coyote-ish. Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at. I'd rather be outside. Sounds like a kill that was fed on by more than one animal, so certainly sounds coyote-ish. And that's the best explanation I've come up with. Funny enough, you're talking about finding cars and stuff like that. Have you ever been out, like, I used to love just exploring the woods. You throw your pack on, you go walking for a few hours. Ever stumble across a house that makes no sense? Because I've stumbled on 3 of them. Literally just little structures. Time has basically reclaimed them. No real roads in. Not on any maps. Nobody really knew it was there. But here stands a structure that clearly at one point had somebody either staying or living in it. Those always kind of, I find strange.
I have found foundations and stuff. I mean, not areas I've been in. I've known like people had lived in these areas in the past, and you know, maybe it was someone's cabin. I mean, where I grew up, a lot of people had cabins and stuff, and you know, they would get forgotten hunting camps and stuff like that. So nothing that seems super out of the ordinary. But when you do find an old abandoned cabin or shack in the woods, it can set your teeth on edge, I guess.
Yeah, once again, just strange. I do got a spooky story that I just thought of when we were talking about structures. This one predates most of my other ones because I wasn't that old. This was when I was 16, 17. I was skipping school. I'm at a school now. The teachers can't do nothing about it. But me and a buddy of mine literally one day were like, you know what? Screw it. We're not going to school. The bus was driving down the road. And this will give you an idea of how long ago it was. And we were going through the old country back roads. And we were driving down. And my buddy looks at me and says, there's supposed to be an abandoned house in there. And at this point, most of us country kids, we loved exploring old abandoned places. One, you know, great place to get tetanus. And two, just, you know, we were hooligans, for lack of a better word. We wanted to find places to hang out and get out of the sight of the adults. Anywho, yep, supposed to be in this area. Whoever it was told him, this is hearsay information, should be off there. Okay, great. There's a stop just up above. We're going to get off the bus. So, first and foremost, that's once again dating this because we got off the bus and the cops weren't immediately called. Because, like I said, we're 16, 17 at the time. We were heading to school, not home, and just got off the bus. And nothing really happened except the next week, the school called our parents to let them know that we had gotten off the bus. So anyway, whole different time. We go into the woods, we get off the bus and then go into the woods, and we're walking around, and we're in there for hours. And we are not really lost, but we have no idea where we're at. You know what I mean? It's an area where it's basically impossible to get lost because you have enough bearings. Oh yeah, if we head in that direction, we're going to eventually hit a road, and if we hit in that direction, we're eventually going to hit a river. That's the kind of lost we were. We weren't lost, but we had no idea where we were at. So anyway, we're stumbling around, we're looking for this old place. Never did find it. But we start finding hanging from trees off in the middle of nowhere, like these, not the wood sprites like what you carved, but somebody had made faces out of wood. And they were just hanging abruptly around in the woods. Like, it was kind of spooky because they weren't good carvings, they were terrifying carvings in the middle of nowhere, just kind of suspended on branches and stuff in maybe like 100 foot by 100 foot areas. So we don't know if there's other people out there just screwing around. Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, I've gone into the woods and been like, I'm going to do something so the next person finds it's going to think they're absolutely nuts. And I've done stuff like that, don't get me wrong. And that could have been what was going on here, but it was kind of spooky. Like, it was just, you're in the dark woods, there's no one around. We're literally talking like 10, 15 kilometers before you hit a house. You know what I mean? And there's just all these hanging faces. And, being the good 16, 17-year-olds we were, we might have been slightly under the influence of a substance. It's hard to say what substance. I'll leave to imaginations. At the time, it was truly terrifying. You know what I mean? As I got older and later, I pawned it off to just somebody screwing around, much like I would do. But that was probably, up to that point, one of the spookiest experiences I've ever had in the woods. Because, once again, the inebriation didn't help things, but the faces just hanging off in the woods, that means somebody had to be there, they had to think this out, they had to do that, and they had to have a purpose. And it's always the purpose that comes back as the questionable point. Somebody being back there, believable. Somebody doing it, okay, if they're back there, the means is there, but what is the purpose behind something like that? And it's always come back to just screwing around, terrify the next kids that come through. Worked. But that's still just an assumption.
Yeah. You never know. I mean, there's all kinds of weird things, and people do things that just don't make sense. I don't always try to understand humans.
So, OBO, Old Bastard Outdoors, found an entire community in Rawdon that only foundations are left. And I think I know the one you're talking about. Is that the old, when you go in, there's still some machinery and stuff left there? I know if it's the one I'm thinking of, it's an old mining town or something like that, and there's some old machinery left there. There's a bunch of foundations. The locals know the area a little bit. The outside people, not so much. Is that sounding right at all, or is this a different place? And I haven't been there myself. A buddy of mine went and took some pictures, and that's the only reason I know about it, but it was in the same area. Yeah, okay, so that is the one. A buddy of mine, he had a Versys, Kawasaki Versys Street and Trail, and he went up there and he actually found that place and took a whole bunch of pictures. From the pictures, real neat area. I've seen it from the sky flying by in a helicopter, but never been down. But it's kind of, it was literally an old mining town, and it was cheaper just to leave everything there and basically decommission it and pull everybody out than it was to try and move all the equipment and stuff out at the time, because there wasn't any real roads going into there. The idea was, I've been told, they were planning to run like a train through there or something, and that's how they were planning to get all this machinery out, was through the tracks, and it didn't happen. There is some history there. It's worth looking up. Daniel is my buddy's name, and like I said, I'm not going to give his last name, but if anybody's interested in that, I'm sure I can pop him a message. And he did some research on it, took some great photos. It's actually kind of a neat area here in Nova Scotia.
Maybe we should check that out.
It is worth. I've always wanted to go, and it looks like we have somebody that can maybe take us into the area a little bit more than I can, because, like I said, I know the general area. I haven't been there myself. I got one for you, Ben. Have you ever seen a ghost in the woods? Because I camped with somebody while I was there that claims up and down they seen somebody walking through the woods, and I know very well there could not have been somebody walking through the woods where they said it was.
No, I can't say I've ever seen a ghost. I've definitely
and we don't know what he's seen either. We make fun of him as a ghost, of course.
I have definitely been in the woods when people have shown up that I did not expect people to show up, and that I gotta say, sometimes that's probably worse. I've often heard people say, "There's not much in the woods that scares me more than other people,"
and that's very true, because animals are predictable. They all follow learned behavior.
I was in the woods with a buddy of mine, and we were out backwoods camping. We had been drove quite a ways back. We got dumped off with our canoe, and we went in some lakes and we portaged, and we were what would have considered like pretty far back there, and we didn't know that there'd be any trails or anything close to this, and we're set up for the night. And I mean, it's probably like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Like you wouldn't expect to see or hear anyone at this time, and all of a sudden, come racing up a trail, and it had to have been a trail, was a couple of ATVs, and I mean, this is the middle of the night, and they park, and I bet you they parked 30 yards away from us, maybe a bit more, but not much. Like when they parked, I could hear their voices pretty clearly, and they were laughing and carrying on and stuff. And me and my buddy kind of looked at each other like, should we make some noises or just be really quiet? Because we have no idea who they are or why they're back here, and maybe they don't want to know that. So, anyways, they chatted. We couldn't clearly hear what they were talking about. You could hear their voices. And then they started the bikes up and they took off again. And honestly, I don't even think they were sober. But that was kind of weird. Like you don't expect that, and you're way back there. And, you know.
On that note, you know the waterfalls where we went camping?
Yeah.
Funny enough, I was walking through the woods, just on tour, exploring old roads, and what do I meet? Another person. Long story short, this is how I found the waterfalls. He was living back there for a summer. That was his mission. He wanted to live back there the entire summer. Did his thing. Anyways, name was Earl. And yeah, I'm walking around, and this guy comes out, and he's not a. I don't want to say he's a scraggly lad, but he's a thin, tall, somewhat lanky kind of fella. Kind of. I hope he doesn't listen to this, because I'm going to describe it, and he's going to be like, "You son of a," you know what I mean. But I mean, coming through the woods, he kind of looked. I don't know how to politely say it. Like, he had kind of sunken in eyes a little bit. The old mountain man beard, kind of scraggly. Clothes weren't the best. Like, you're like, all right, here's a character. Let's call him a character. You know what I mean? Kind of just in passing. Hey, how's it going? Good. And that, just short, quiet answers. I'm like, yeah, all right. And yeah, people tend to be the creepiest thing in the woods. Well, once again, we did eventually get chat, and I gave him a ride into town because he was looking for some supplies to set up, and this is how I found out he was sleeping out there. So once again, don't judge a book by its cover, I guess. But people can be unnerving in the woods because, once again, animals typically follow learned behaviors. You know what I mean? People are very unpredictable because you don't know what behaviors they've learned.
No.
Because it depends on their upbringing, depends their beliefs, depends on their little geographic location where they were brought. A lot of crazy things. But sorry, I digress a little bit, going back to Dave's ghost story. So yeah, he had to go take a leak once again. We're a little older now, having a few drinks. He wanders off quite far to have a pee for whatever reason. Comes back, looks white as a ghost, like, guys, I'm pretty sure I just seen something in the woods. And we're like, okay, Dave, what'd you see, bud? We're thinking, seeing a deer, raccoon, something like that. Well, it was this kind of shadowy figure in a cloak with these glowing eyes walking through the woods. And we're like, okay, Dave, maybe you should lay off a little bit. Anyway, we get chat and we make fun of him. Yeah, all in good fun. We weren't harassing this guy, but we were I have to get back to work. Got a page, take care. All right, buddy. Have a good one. Thanks for stopping in. Anyway, he's really put out about this experience. So collectively in the morning, we go and we look, and there's tracks and stuff like that. Sure enough, something was there. And the best I can come up with is it was probably a black bear or something. Noticed he was there, stood up on its hind legs. And if you ever seen a black bear stand up, they kind of look humanish wearing a cloak. And if he had his headlamp on, it very well could have caught the eyes, and it's going to look like somebody in a cloak with glowing eyes. My 2 cents. He swears up and down that there was more to it than that. And you know what? Maybe there was. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. But very easily, that's my logical, rational explanation to that. It's probably just a bear. Wasn't expecting them. Stood up, because they do that when they're curious. They stand up to get a better view or to look bigger or whatever the case may be. And then, of course, it buggered off. And, that was... I could potentially see that being a very unnerving situation to somebody. And have you ever noticed how most good stories that involve seeing weird stuff in the woods involve some sort of inebriation? And buddies.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
My wife just walked in. So seeing she's here, I'm going to pick on her a little bit. And she can just speak up from the corner there. Because I do, once again, poke a little fun at her from this. And it was a new time experience camping with me. First time we'd ever been camping, it was one of our dating trips. It was supposed to be us and a set of friends. One of the friends couldn't go, so it ended up being three of us. They slept in their tent. Mel and I were in ours. Anyway, we were by a lake. And once again, we're back to that water noise. You know what I mean? Middle of the night, all is calm, not a lot of wind. You hear a giant splash. Generally wakes you up. It's a spooky sound if you don't know what could cause a splash in a lake. Of course, Mel gives me the nudge. What the hell was that? I'm like, it could be a beaver. You know, there's logical explanations to some of these things. I figure it was either a beaver slapping its tail, which they do. So anybody that's, you know, in and around water and you hear splashing in the middle of the night, see if there's a beaver dam around, because those suckers can make a ton of noise. The other thing that it could be, diving ducks. They fly up a little bit and then they hit the water. Generally not at night, but, you know, it's not a stretch to say there's a daft duck out there doing weird things. But, I mean, diving ducks can sound like a rocket in the water.
I'm pretty sure I've heard noise that I associate with a turtle coming off a small, I want to say cliff, but bank into the water. And it sounds an awful lot like a rock hitting the water.
And it could be, too. Could have been a turtle, like, following, like, especially if it's Indian Lake, for anybody that's wondering where it is on top of Weaver's Mountain. They have rocks that come up in, like, the lake itself's not overly deep. At the deepest place, it might be like 20 feet. But generally along the outside borders, it's pretty shallow. You're talking 3-4 feet. You get a big boulder, it's going to stick out of the water. So if a turtle had been sitting on that and decided to bail in, it could have made that sound too. But there's a lot of real, rational, clear explanations to water splashing. And I do know that a lot of people hear water splashing and it becomes a what made that sound moment. The reality is there's a ton of stuff out there that can make splashing water.
Oh, there is a lot. And it's probably one of the more common ones that people experience. I've often been out in the woods and heard noises in the water that concerned me, and it's animals walking through it or splashing. Even at my cabin, like I'll set up the hammock outside, and the noises you hear sometimes in the middle of the night are with the lake is pretty impressive.
I was going to say, a deer walking through a lake, it sounds like somebody slogging through the lake. You know what I mean? If you're way out back in the middle of the woods and you're already kind of on edge, you're not going to think, oh, you know, it's just a deer crossing over a shallow. You're going to think, why is there somebody walking through the lake and are they coming towards me? Because, to be fair, even those with the most experience out there, for whatever reason, the human brain tends to try and jump to the worst possible conclusion first and then backpedal from there. You know what I mean? So it's real easy to amp yourself up with what could it be that could hurt me, because that is a natural instinct for survival. Is this going to hurt me? Do I need to fight, flight? Which we talked about at the first. And generally, if you're like, okay, or sorry, once you have that process of do I need to fight or flight, generally most people start weighing their options. Okay, what could that logically have been? Is it gaining speed? Is it coming towards me? These are the questions you start asking yourself, and as you get more information, generally you can kind of backpedal a little bit and rationally figure most stuff out. And generally, what goes bump in the night in the woods is not going to bother you. No. People, on the other hand, you never know. People are the wild card, and we've said that. I make an attempt that if anybody's walking through, I try to shout to people and let them know, hey, I'm here. If you need something, come get it. Some people would argue, no, you shouldn't do that because you may attract the unwanted attention of somebody that's going to do some harm to you. I mean, look at me. I'm a 300-pound guy. If somebody wants to do some harm to me in the backwoods, they're going to have a time on their hands, and they're going to earn it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think both of us have said something similar in the past, and there is that is a healthy, full-grown human is something that's difficult for anyone to deal with. So, you know, unless, you know, the person is unreasonably strong or has a large number of people with them.
Off to bed, bud. Yes, I'm talking. Come say hi and then go to bed. You're supposed to have been asleep an hour ago. Say
You're
hi and
still
off you go.
awake?
You want to watch Daddy on bed?
No, you need to go and go to sleep. You're supposed to be asleep, not in bed. Asleep. Off you go. Off to bed.
This is Ben.
This is Ben. Wave and off you go.
Bye.
Hi.
All right. Off to bed, bud.
You're still in the cuteness factor from Robert.
Yeah, well, you know what? That might drive the ratings up. I have no idea what I was talking about, Ben. Completely side railed.
Well, I was actually talking. So I was saying, like, the average person, if they decided to put up a fight, can do a lot of damage to somebody trying to. I don't think it's generally the first instinct for anyone is to start a fight. But we do, guys, I think, are a bit more cocky. And we are a little bit more confident that if we attract attention, we can handle ourselves. But I think that most people can at least put up a reasonable fight. And most people don't mean to cause harm. So most people you run into aren't going to be dangerous. But one of the biggest dangers is that fear that you talked about. Because if you decided to carry a gun or a knife or something, and you're already spooked and hyped up and adrenaline running, and something pops out, the chances of you throwing or shooting or reacting to that in a negative way is quite high. So that instinctive worst scenario, and I think kind of can play off itself. So you really got to kind of...
That's where I normally come from with why I usually say hello. I'd rather be like, hello, I am here, and take my chances in case they are, out on a hunting trip, going to the hunting camp, or they're just out camping and they're one of the ones that believe they need a gun for protection or something like that, because there are people out there, though, teach their own, whatever. It's not something I do, but to each their own. I want to make it known that I'm human, I'm friendly, please don't shoot me. If they're a bad person, they're probably going to find it, probably going to do it anyway. You know what I mean? The chances of two murderers being in the woods is slim to none. Okay, that was a joke, everybody. Please don't take that the wrong way. But anyway, it's true. Realistically, the chances are pretty high for somebody roaming around the woods looking for somebody to hurt. You know what I mean? Especially where we go camping and quite off the beaten path. Most people, they're going to go, even if the quote-unquote dumping a body scenario. Most people don't go far off an ATV trail or something like that. You know what I mean? They're not walking great deals of distance where you have to walk and carry said body to get rid of it. It's just not realistic. So I feel pretty confident that I'm just going to say hey and try not to get stabbed or shot in the middle of the night. Or at least I know how they're going to react, and it takes the wonder out of it. But yeah, humans have always been the wild card. And actually, I had one more thing I was going to add. You said a full-grown male can generally take care of themselves. As somebody that's worked security and has wrangled both men and women, I would much rather tackle a full-grown man than a woman that's scared. Or not scared, doesn't want to be caught. You want to talk about something wrangly, and I don't know if that's the right word, but I mean, I got twisted up in knots.
I was by no means trying to be sexist.
No, and I weren't saying you were. I just mean from experience.
I think I said it before. Men tend to be a bit more cocky with this thing. The reality is there's a lot of strength in the human body, period. And most people don't realize how strong they are.
And the other thing is, once fear triggers adrenaline, a lot of your body's protections, like if you go, as Ben said, most people don't realize how strong they are. You hear the stories about people lifted a car off their, screaming child and things like that. It's not that these are fake stories. It's that during situations of duress, when adrenaline is pumping, your body kind of unlocks itself or unblocks itself. There's things put into your body that keep it from tearing itself apart, because most of us are strong enough. If we used 100% of our strength, we could actually damage our skeletal structure, our ligaments or tendons and stuff like that. We do it when you pull a muscle. So your body has these safety mechanisms put in that says, no, stupid, don't go beyond this point, you can't handle it. You know what I mean? So once the adrenaline kicks in, your neurons and stuff like that, when they start misfiring because you're running basically on fear and adrenaline, those aren't always in place. You can push yourself past comfortable limits where potentially you could get hurt, but you're also going to do a lot of damage before that pain shuts you down.
Um, yeah, it's yeah. I agree 100%. You can, and I've seen some impressive things when people are on adrenaline, and it's it's definitely something to behold.
Another thing that does it is drugs, especially one that's prevalent here in the Pictou County area for whatever reason, because it never was. Crack and crystal meth. It's not like it's rampant. It's not every street corner, but for whatever reason, I'm starting to see it show up in some of the reports that come across my desk, and I'm like, when was this ever a problem here? But apparently, that stuff will do the same thing. It blocks the path of your body's warnings, going, no, don't do this. You're probably going to get hurt. And these people can do some really weird things, like, oh, they had superhuman strength. No, they had strength that they normally have. Their body just didn't shut it down from tearing themselves apart.
I fortunately have not experienced that, but I can imagine.
It's an interesting time.
Yeah.
But actually, if anybody wants to, it's an interesting subject. If you're bored late at night, early in the day, sitting at work, whatever your case may be, do a little Google research on it. It's kind of an interesting subject. Not the drugs, the whole body blocking, tearing itself apart thing.
I think the big thing to take away from this is the human imagination is an amazing thing in itself, and it is impressive. And when you get out there, you can see some things that are probably pretty benign, but you can definitely build them up, like our voices from the river and stuff like that. And there are people like myself who make those little figurines in the woods. And I think we've all come across the odd thing, a toy that shouldn't have been there or something like that, just in the woods. It happens, like how they get back there, who knows? But it can set you a little on edge. And it's just part of the adventure. Learning to take it kind of in stride and note it and just move on. Just try not to let it freak you right out, because it would be really disappointing that you have a bad experience, an interesting experience, and then don't go out there again, because you miss out on a lot of good stuff.
And yeah, most things have a rational to logical explanation, and those that don't generally make a good story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I guess the last thing I was trying to work into this episode somewhere, because I always try to put little snippets of information in where I can. If you're ever in the woods and you're curious about something, humans are one of the animals on the planet that have a very keen ability to throw. And it throws a lot of animals off because they don't expect it. They don't expect something to be thrown because, once again, not a lot of animals throw things. Some primates, things like that, of course, they can throw, but they don't have the accuracy or the conviction that we have as human beings to throw, and it really does start a lot of animals. Now, I'm not saying go out there and throw rocks at animals, but if you get in a situation where you're potentially scared, and you have no other response, because, fight generally is not worth life, but if you do have that I have nothing to do, what do I do kind of moments, try throwing something, not potentially at the potential animal or said whatever, because if you hit it, you could anger it, and that could trigger something else, but just throw in the general direction to spook. Most animals, especially in Nova Scotia, because we don't have very large predators, they'll be like, what the hell is that? I'm not used to stuff like that, and they're going to bail out. You know what I mean? Once again, take that with a grain of salt. I'm not saying this is, if you're on the African safari, don't throw sticks at lions. You know what I mean? But, I mean, generally most animals do not expect throwing as anything. They don't see it a lot in the wild, and more often than not, it confuses them, and they're just like, nah, not screwing with that. That's beyond my comprehension. I'm out.
That thing has magic. Leave it alone.
Yeah, like, I can't throw. And something Steve said that I forgot to circle back to, sorry, Steve, was just a branch falling can cause quite a racket when you're sleeping. And I mean, that's a lot of people, that's probably the number one thing people hear when they're like, I heard something moving in the woods. you probably heard the wind blow a branch. You know what I mean?
All right.
Because you may be under the tree line, you're not getting a lot of wind. If those trees are 30, 40 feet tall, up at the top of that, there could be enough breeze that'll make them sway, and then the branches rubbing each other. Me and Tom, another buddy of mine from Natural Resources, we looked for 2 hours for what somebody swore was a deer trapped and crying in the woods, and we heard it. And we looked and looked and looked and looked and looked, and finally it was two old trees rubbing together, like dried trees, dried popple. And the way they were rubbing together, it sounded like a deer crying. So, I mean, it makes weird noises. But I'm surprised. I expected this to be a rather short show. We managed to come up on 50 minutes. Hopefully you guys have had a few laughs at our stories out there. And by all means, give us your stories. These are the things I enjoy hearing. I'm a very big storyteller, story listener. I enjoy stories. I think it tells a lot about how a person is, how they interpret stuff, and I said that at the start. So I would love to hear your folks' stories and tales out there. Shoot us an email, which you can find on our website, or a message or something like that. I genuinely would love to hear some of your guys' stories out there.
Me too, for sure. Yeah. So that's what. That's just shy of an hour. That's almost short for us.
It is short, but it's not as short as I thought. I thought this was going to be like a 35-minute episode, which, once again, little different stride for us, but hopefully you folks out there enjoyed it. If you want to hear more of this, once again, let us know. Either comment, email, whatever. At this point, if you're on episode 153, I assume you know how to get a hold of us or how to avoid us, if that's your thing. And yeah, because I personally, I did enjoy this, honestly. I enjoy telling stories, as you folks can tell out there. I probably chatted way more than I needed to, but this is my thing, honestly.
Another thing we could possibly do, and just throw it out there, is cool things we found in the woods. Not necessarily weird or... So I think you've said it all. I'm just going to say goodnight, all. Have a good time. Get out there. Have fun.
Night, everybody. We'll see you next week.